This session is an introduction to the autonomic nervous system. The learning objectives are to review the structure and functioning unit of the nervous system, to describe the anatomical and functional classification of the nervous system, to describe the autonomic nervous system, and to describe the autonomic ganglia. Starting with the regulating systems. The function of the various systems of the body are coordinated and integrated according to the body needs by two control systems: the nervous system and the endocrine system. The endocrine system. It is formed of endocrine gland that secretes chemical messenger called the hormones, which are carried by the blood and influence the activity of some distant organs. It acts slowly but has a prolonged action. The nervous system. The nervous system is responsible for the rapid regulation of functions of the various systems of the body. It receives millions of signals of information from the different sensory organs and then integrates them in the CNS to determine the response to be made by the body. Now, what is the structural unit of the nervous system? The structural unit of the nervous system is the neuron, which is formed of cell body or the soma and the cell processes. The cell body is usually multipolar, surrounded by cell membrane and contains the nucleus with many cytoplasmic organelles. The cell processes are of two types: the dendrites, which are short, branched, and receive the ongoing impulses to the cell body, and the axon, which is the nerve fiber, which is a long process of the cell that carries the impulses from the cell body. A nerve is formed of large number of nerve fibers. The axons may be myelinated, where the axon is covered by myelin sheath, or non-myelinated, where the myelin sheath is absent. The impulses are transmitted from one nerve cell to another at the synapse. These are the sites where the axon of one neuron terminates on the dendrites, soma, or the axon of another neuron. There is a space called the synaptic cleft. It's the site in which the chemical transmitters, the neurotransmitter, is released. That's to say, there is no direct communication. Now, what is the functional unit of the nervous system? The reflex arc is the functional unit of the nervous system. The pathway followed in the nervous system in the reflex action is called the reflex arc. The component of the reflex arc includes the receptor, which respond to the stimulus, the afferent pathway, which transmit impulses to the spinal cord, the central nervous system, the spinal cord that processes the information, the efferent pathway, which transmit impulses out of the spinal cord, and then the effector organ, which include muscle or gland that receive the impulses from the motor neuron and carries out the desired response. Now remember that the nervous system is the main rapid coordinator of the whole body activities, and it's divided anatomically into central nervous system, which is formed of the brain and the spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system, which is formed of the peripheral ganglia and the peripheral nerves. Classification of the nervous system. Central nervous system formed of the brain and the spinal cord, peripheral nervous system formed of the ganglia and the nerves. According to the site of origin, the peripheral nerves may be divided into cranial nerves and spinal nerves. The cranial nerves, they are 12 pairs originating from the brain. Each pair has a name. They are also numbered from 1 to 12. They may contain only sensory fibers or only motor fibers or mixed sensory and motor fibers. The spinal nerves. To each segment of the spinal cord, one pair of the spinal nerves is attached. Each nerve is connected to the spinal cord by two roots: posterior root, which is functionally formed of the afferent fibers; anterior root, which is formed of the efferent motor fibers. The anterior root fuses with the posterior root beyond the ganglion to form the spinal nerve. All spinal nerves are mixed nerves. They contain sensory and motor fibers. The peripheral nerves functionally are classified into sensory fibers and motor fibers. The afferent or the sensory fibers carry impulses from the periphery to the central nervous system. thus bringing information about the external world from the receptors that are sensitive to stimuli such as light, sound, temperature, or pressure. Also, they bring to the central nervous system information about the internal status of the body, for example, the tension in the muscle or the distension in the viscera, while the efferent or the motor fibers carry nerve impulses from the central nervous system to the muscle, gland, and other organs. From the functional point of view, the nervous system can be divided into two systems. The somatic nervous system, it functions on the basis of the reflex arc to affect the activity of the skeletal muscle. And the autonomic nervous system, like the somatic nervous system, it's organized on the basis of the reflex arc, but it controls the involuntary plane muscle, the heart, and the secreting glands. The autonomic nervous system. It's the portion of the nervous system that controls the visceral function of the body. Impulses initiated in the visceral receptor are relayed via the afferent autonomic fibers to the CNS, integrated within it at various levels, and transmitted via the efferent pathway to the visceral effectors organ, which include the plane muscle, the heart, and the secreting gland. The autonomic nervous system has a sympathetic division and a parasympathetic division. So the autonomic nervous system has a sympathetic division that prepares the body to face the fight and fright, and a parasympathetic division that is dominant during rest. The sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system, its nerves originate from the lateral horn cells of all the thoracic and the upper three lumbar segments of the spinal cord. So it's called the thoracolumbar system. The parasympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system is the craniosacral outflow of the autonomic nervous system. The cranial outflow supplies the visceral structure in the head and neck via the oculomotor, the third cranial nerve, the facial, which is the seventh cranial nerve, the glossopharyngeal nerve, which is the ninth cranial nerve. About 75% of all the parasympathetic nerve fibers are in the vagus, which is the 10th cranial nerve, passing to the entire thoracic and abdominal viscera. For the sacral outflow, it supplies the pelvic viscera via the pelvic branches of the second, third, fourth sacrospinal nerve. Now, since we know that the somatic and the autonomic nervous system, their function is based on the reflex arc, we have to ask ourselves an important question. What is the difference between the somatic and the autonomic nervous system? The somatic nervous system, it functions on the basis of the reflex arc to affect the activity of the skeletal muscles. Each motor somatic pathway from the cord to the skeletal muscle is composed of a single fiber, so it's called one neuron system. While the autonomic nervous system, like the somatic nervous system, it's organized on the basis of the reflex arc, but it controls the involuntary plane muscles, the heart, the glands. Each autonomic involuntary pathway, on the other hand, is formed of two fibers, preganglionic fibers and postganglionic fibers. The preganglionic fibers relay in the ganglion, and the postganglionic fibers arises from the ganglion. So it's called two-neuron system. Remember that somatic nervous system control voluntary actions, while the autonomic nervous system control involuntary actions. The afferent fibers of the somatic nervous system relay in the dorsal horn cell. That's to say, their efferent arises from the anterior horn cell, while the afferent of the autonomic nervous system relay on the lateral horn cell. That's to say, their efferent arises from the lateral horn cells or the cranial nuclei. The efferent somatic fibers go directly to the skeletal muscles without interruption and without change in the number of the fibers. The efferent of the autonomic nervous system, their fibers relay in the autonomic ganglia and multiply in numbers before supplying the effector organs. The neurotransmitter at the efferent somatic termination is one type. It's acetylcholine. While the autonomic nervous system transmitters are two types, acetylcholine or noradrenaline. So remember that the autonomic nervous system, is organized on the basis of the reflex arc. It controls the involuntary plane muscles, the heart, and the glands. Each autonomic involuntary pathway is formed of two fibers, preganglionic fibers and postganglionic fibers. So it's a two-neuron system. Now coming to an important question. What is the autonomic ganglia? A ganglion is a collection of neurons present outside the central nervous system. Autonomic ganglia contain postganglionic neurons. They act as a distributing center, as each of the preganglionic fiber will synapse with 8 or 9 postganglionic neurons. So the ratio between the preganglionic to postganglionic fibers is 1 to 8 or 9. So always remember that the autonomic pathway is a two-neuron system. Preganglionic neuron arises from the lateral horn cell of the spinal cord, relaying the autonomic ganglia. Then the postganglionic fiber arises from the autonomic ganglia to reach the effector organ. We have four types of autonomic ganglia: paravertebral sympathetic chain, collateral ganglia, terminal ganglia, and the adrenal medulla as a modified ganglia. Starting with the paravertebral ganglia. It's present on both sides of vertebral column as ganglion for each segment of the spinal cord, except the cervical region. There are only three cervical ganglia: superior, middle, and inferior. This group is for the sympathetic relay only. That's why it's called sympathetic chain. Coming to the collateral ganglia. It's present midway between the spinal cord and the viscera, at the origin of the big vessels from the abdominal aorta, named according to the vessels: celiac, superior, and inferior mesenteric ganglia. These are for the relay of the lower thoracic and the lumbar preganglionic sympathetic fibers. The ciliary ganglion for the third cranial nerve to the eye, the sphenopalatine and submaxillary ganglia for the seventh cranial nerve, and the otic ganglia for the ninth cranial nerve are considered as collateral parasympathetic ganglia. Now, the terminal ganglia are present very near or in the visceral organ itself. They are for the relay of the 10th cranial nerve, the vagus, its parasympathetic fibers, and also for the pelvic parasympathetic fibers. The postganglionic fibers are very short, about 1 millimeter, up to several centimeters in length. The adrenal medulla is considered as a sympathetic ganglion in which the postganglionic cells or the neuron have lost their axons. So there is no postganglionic fibers, and instead there is a secretion of the catecholamines directly into the bloodstream. That's why it's called modified ganglia. Note that the cholinergic preganglionic neurons of the lower thoracic lateral horn cell pass directly without relay to become the secretomotor nerve supply to this gland. Always remember the importance of the autonomic ganglia. The autonomic ganglia serve as distributing centers, so that one preganglionic fiber give rise to several postganglionic fibers that distribute the autonomic impulse to many organs, doing what is known as divergence. Also remember that the sympathetic preganglionic fibers relay at ganglia that are situated away from the effector organs: the paravertebral, which is the sympathetic chain, the collateral, the modified ganglia, which is the adrenal medulla. Such arrangement permit marked divergence and spread of the sympathetic impulses, leading to generalized sympathetic function. And this is beneficial during the emergency condition. On the other hand, parasympathetic preganglionic fibers relay at ganglia that are situated close to the effector organs, collateral and terminal ganglia. Such arrangement limits the diversion and the spreading of the parasympathetic impulses, leading to localized parasympathetic functions. This is also beneficial since generalized parasympathetic stimulation is undesirable and may be dangerous or even fatal. By this, we finish today's session. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.